Hey, it's Kyle here, and as someone who makes Star Wars book content on their YouTube channel, a very common question I get is like, hey, I'm a Star Wars fan, but I've never really gotten to the books. I'm thinking of starting. Where's a good place to start? Or are there any must-reads I need to check out? And occasionally I even get those similar questions from people who already read Star Wars books, but it'll be something like, there are so many Star Wars books, it can be a little overwhelming. I don't want to be missing anything that I really need to read. Are there any books like as someone who's reading Star Wars books, like, don't miss this one. This is a must read. And I was kind of thinking of that as I thought, like, what type of content I'd like to make for my channel in 2025. And I realized I've never really done a video like, here's my suggestions of the books that anybody interested in Star Wars books, at least for me, I feel like you need to read. You need to check out these. So I'm going to do a video with my 5 books that any Star Wars fan must read. Now I'm purposely kind of dividing these up into like different types of books so you get a little bit of feeling of the entire offerings of the Star Wars books universe. I could have easily just done like 3 or 4 books in the same series, but I feel like, no, that's really not the best way to do this. And also when I was, a couple of these books are part of a series, I'm like, I'm going to do the first book in a series, because even though like, some of these series, like the last book might be the most awesome one, that's not a good place for somebody to start. If I'm saying like, here's the books you must read, hey, read the last book in the series, skip all the books leading up to it. So that's just a little bit of, I guess you say, the rationale behind the books I selected. So I hope you'll enjoy this list. I tried to give a good variety, but again, here are my 5 books I think all Star Wars fans must read. All right, first up, we have my favorite Star Wars book of all time, and really the book that got me to fall in love with Star Wars books, and that is Heir to the Empire by Timothy Zahn. This book really created the Star Wars book community. The success of this book really convinced Lucas, like, hey, maybe we need to do these Star Wars books things, and really launched the entire industry of Star Wars books. It's absolutely amazing, and not only is it a great Star Wars book, it's generally regarded as just an amazing sci-fi book. So I know occasionally I've seen those lists of like, here's the 100 best sci-fi books, or from a certain period, or the 100 best in the 90s, or whatever type of list it is. Very rarely do you see Star Wars books make that type of list. I think a lot of times when books are connected with a movie franchise, like they just kind of get ignored by critics and stuff like that. You'll see Heir to the Empire make that list all the time. It is an amazing book. It introduces so many characters that Star Wars books fans just fell in love with. Thrawn, Mara Jade, just to name a couple. It's an amazing story. Thrawn is my favorite Star Wars book character. Absolutely love him. The writing of Timothy Zahn is amazing. The series that this book starts is what a lot of people kind of hoped the episode 7, 8, and 9 would turn out before we knew that Disney was going to purchase this and do what they did with 7, 8, and 9. This book is absolutely amazing. So if you've never read a Star Wars book, this is an amazing one to check out. Now keep in mind, this is a pre-Disney book, so the events in this book are no longer considered canon, but that doesn't mean you still can't enjoy this book. I'll say this version is a special one they did for the 20th anniversary, but there are a lot of versions out there, different covers and stuff like that. In fact, I love this book so much. This is the only Star Wars book that I have multiple versions of, because I just like kind of collecting the covers and stuff. But amazing story with amazing characters, and I think if you're interested in finding out what Star Wars books are all about, a great place to start is the book that really started the entire Star Wars book community, Heir to the Empire by Timothy Zahn. All right, next up, for a little change up, a little humor, a little something different, and something I think will help you view the Star Wars movies in maybe a different way that you've never really thought about before. It's William Shakespeare Star Wars, Verily a New Hope by Ian Doescher. Ian did a Shakespearean version for all 9 movies. These books are absolutely amazing. So it's very simple. He basically wrote the plot of each movie like it was a William Shakespeare play. It's absolutely amazing, very funny. It's very cool to see how you can kind of basically take this amazing sci-fi movie franchise, but set it in the world of William Shakespeare. Absolutely love this. One of my favorite things to do every year is when I go to Dragon Con in Atlanta in the Star Wars track. Always one of the main highlights is they have a lot of volunteers come in and reenact one of these plays. You get a little Shakespearean Star Wars play. A lot of fun. I think this is a great book for somebody to read that maybe is really into English literature. You're a huge Shakespeare fan, but you happen to be into sci-fi too. You get the best of both worlds. There'll be Shakespearean jokes in here that as someone who loves Shakespeare you'll get, but there'll be also some amazing Star Wars moments that you'll find very, very funny to see them set in the world of Shakespeare. These books are very short, they're quick reads, they're amazing. I highly recommend them, and I think it's a great way to show that Star Wars books can just be a lot of fun. It doesn't have to be a super serious story. It can just be a fun read and make you view the movies of Star Wars in a different light. Next up, I want to highlight the books in the From a Certain Point of View series. This specific one I have is Return of the Jedi. It's the one they put out for the 40th anniversary of Return of the Jedi. Often they put these books out for the major milestones of the movies. So they haven't quite done all the movies yet, but they've done several of them. Again, these books, much like the Shakespeare one, can be very fun, but they also sometimes can take a dark turn, a different look at it, almost sometimes a little bit of like a Twilight Zone aspect look at a Star Wars movie. And basically what this is, it's a collection of short stories, and it takes characters from each of these movies and kind of explores something that happened to that character in that movie. So for example, it might be like, oh, here's a random character that was in Jabba's palace in the events that begin in Return of the Jedi. Well, let's do a little short story about them and find out, like, how did they get to the palace? What did they go through during the rescue attempt? What was their life like? You know, here's a story of a random droid on Jabba's barge. What was going through that droid's mind as he was interacting with R2-D2? Here's what a stormtrooper on the Death Star was thinking when he got first assigned to the battle station, and what did he think about life on the battle station? You know, some of these have a little bit more serious, dark side to them. Other ones are very, very funny. And there's a few of these that will focus on main characters in the movie. Like some of my favorite are these little background characters. You're like, no, I wouldn't mind knowing a little bit about them. And you get a little funny or interesting or intriguing look at like what their life was, what brought them to this point that led them to be a part of the events of Return of the Jedi or whichever other the movies that these books explore. Now, it's important to note these books are not considered canon, so when you read a short story, you're like, oh, this is what, again, this random character at Jabba's palace was actually doing. This is not really wholly considered canon, although sometimes some of these elements from these stories do find their way to make it into canon. But again, a fun read that I think can help you appreciate the movies in a new light. And after I read this book, it was a lot of fun to then go back and like watch Return of the Jedi and pick out the characters who had short stories featured about them and go like, hey, I know a little bit more about your backstory now. So I definitely recommend checking out the books in From a Certain Point of View series. So next up, I want to highlight a book that was a first for me in Star Wars. It's the first time I read a Star Wars book that when I read it, I was like, did I actually enjoy this as much or maybe even more than Heir to the Empire by Timothy Zahn? It's the first time I had a book that I had to seriously think about, is this my new favorite Star Wars book? And that would be Light of the Jedi by Charles Soule. This is the first book in the High Republic series. So this book is actually one that's been published by Disney. So it's now considered canon. High Republic series is basically set a couple hundred years before the events of the prequel movies and basically explores the Jedi Order and the Republic at their height, their golden age. But you begin to see the elements that began to lead to their downfall that basically led to the events of the prequel movies. Light of the Jedi is an amazing start to this series. The first half of this book is non-stop action, and it's one of those things, you almost feel like you're on a roller coaster when you read this book. Like, you keep on like, is this going to keep on going and going and going? It's absolutely amazing. The characters in this series I actually love. There's so many amazing Jedi characters, civilian characters, political figures in the Republic. The villains in this series are really awesome and really intriguing and creative. I've loved this series so much. It's actually getting ready to wrap up fairly soon. So honestly, when this series wraps up, depending on how it wraps up and how satisfying I find it, it might make Light of the Jedi my favorite Star Wars book of all time. I absolutely love this book so much. So if you're looking to get into maybe some stories that are kind of set away from the movies and kind of explore a new era, the High Republic series is great because you really don't need to have any Star Wars knowledge to read this series, because nearly all the information presented in these books are brand new to Star Wars fans. So you don't have to go like, oh, I've had to read 48 other books to understand what's happening in this book. No, you can just start this series and you're not really going to be behind. So I highly recommend Light of the Jedi and checking out the High Republic series. And the last book I wanted to highlight is kind of a combination of my Star Wars nerdom and my love for history, and that is The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire by Dr. Chris Kempshall. I actually love the concept of this book. So this book is, in our world, is actually written by Dr. Chris Kempshall, who is a well-respected historian who specializes in World War II, a real legit historian who just happens to be a major Star Wars fan. Amazingly enough, Disney gave him permission to basically write a Star Wars history book in character as a historian in the Star Wars universe. So this book specifically is written by a historian, again in the Star Wars galaxy, basically writing about the rise and the fall of the Galactic Empire, and kind of basically cataloging like how the Empire came to power, what it was like when it was governing the galaxy, and what led to its downfall. Now, one thing I'll mention this book does not create any new Star Wars content. He's basically compiled all the stuff that's been mentioned in movies, video games, books, everything Star Wars related. He's kind of compiled. It's amazing. It's a very interesting look at the Empire from more of an academic standpoint. But I think as a Star Wars fan, even if you're not into history, it's really cool, really intriguing to kind of have this deep dive into what the Empire was all about. I think the great thing about this is also if you're somebody who loves Star Wars, but either doesn't have the time to try to consume all the Star Wars content that's produced, or maybe you just feel like it's just too overwhelming to try to catch up on everything. For example, for me, like I don't really read the comic books, so there's a lot of big Star Wars info that I just miss out on because I don't read the comic books. Well, the great thing about reading this book is it's compiled all this info into one place, so you kind of learn stuff, even though it's not technically new info. It maybe it's just stuff that you haven't read before, or watched before, or played a video game before, and now you're learning this info. And like I said, since it's written from a point of view of a character in this galaxy, it hits much harder. So when like this character is talking about the tragedy of like how many people died in the war, it makes it feel more real versus like if it was being written by a historian in our world and just kind of examining what Star Wars is like. Then it goes like, well, this just is a fictional story, but this is what they're talking about. It's still interesting, but the impact is different when you're again reading from a character. Go like, this is what it meant to the galaxy when Alderaan was destroyed and the civilization was just wiped out. An amazing book, and I highly, highly recommend it. So those are my 5 books I think all Star Wars fans should read. Now, I think if you talk to other people, they'll have completely different books on their list. For me, this kind of just matches up with the type of Star Wars books that I enjoy, that I find interesting, and I think that other people could benefit from if they're into Star Wars books or want to get into Star Wars books by checking these books out. But definitely don't limit yourself to these books. Hopefully you'll check out some of these books, you'll read them, you'll enjoy them, and it'll get you to explore more of these Star Wars books that are out there. There's so many amazing ones to check out. It's an amazing journey to go on. It can be a little overwhelming because there's so many that have been published, but maybe these 5 books are a good way to get yourself started. In the comment section below, maybe let me know if you're a Star Wars book fan, are there any books you would recommend for people to check out that you consider must read for Star Wars books fans? I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you have yet. I really appreciate the support. I put a lot of thought in this video, so I really appreciate all the support you can show it, because maybe if this one does well, I'll do more videos like this where I kind of do more deep dives into recommendations, what I would suggest you get into, maybe some other stuff beyond Star Wars, maybe more Star Wars recommendations. But anyway, again, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you the next time, and may the Force be with you.